You don't deserve a single penny of this inheritance, Margaret screamed, but the 8-year-old girl clutched a crumpled envelope that would change everything. Inside was a document that would prove who the real thief was. Before we begin, please leave a comment about this story and give it a rating from 1 to 10. How are you doing today? If there's something weighing on your heart that you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope this story brings you a few moments of peace and reminds you that justice, though sometimes delayed, never fails to arrive. The heavy oak door of the Victorian mansion creaked shut behind the last mourner. The funeral reception for Eleanor Whitmore had ended, but the silence that followed felt heavier than grief itself. Sarah Whitmore, 8 years old with golden hair that caught the dying afternoon light, sat alone on the marble steps of her grandmother's grand staircase, clutching a worn teddy bear against her chest. The house that had once echoed with laughter and bedtime stories now felt cold and hollow. Eleanor Whitmore had been more than a grandmother to Sarah. She had been her entire world. After Sarah's parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, Eleanor had opened not just her home but her heart, promising the little girl that she would never be alone as long as she drew breath. But Eleanor's breath had stopped 2 days ago, and now Sarah felt more alone than ever. Margaret Blackwood, Eleanor's younger sister, swept into the foyer like a storm cloud. At 55, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed the world owed her everything. Her black dress was expensive but somehow made her look even more severe, and her eyes held the cold calculation of a woman who had spent years waiting for this moment. Behind her followed her son, Derek, a 28-year-old man with soft hands and softer morals. He had never worked a day in his life, content to live off his mother's schemes and his grandmother's generosity when it suited him. Today, his usually smug expression carried an edge of nervous excitement. Margaret's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached Sarah. The little girl looked up with red-rimmed eyes, hoping to find comfort in the only family she had left. Instead, she found ice. "Sarah," Margaret's voice was crisp as winter air. "We need to talk." The child slid down from the step, her small hands trembling as she set her teddy bear carefully on the marble surface. "Are you going to take care of me now, Aunt Margaret?" "Grandmama said family always takes care of family." Margaret's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached her eyes. "Oh, sweet child, I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding." She pulled out a thick legal document from her designer handbag, the papers crisp and official looking. "You see, your grandmother's will has been revised. She left everything, the house, the investments, the trust fund, to me. After all, I am her sister, her true blood relative." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. But Grandmama promised. She said this would always be my home. She said she set up a trust so I could go to college and never have to worry about money." Derek stepped forward, his voice carrying a cruel edge of amusement. "Kids believe a lot of fairy tales, don't they, Mother? The old woman probably told you all sorts of stories to make you feel better." "The will is very clear," Margaret continued, her voice growing harder. "Eleanor left you nothing. Perhaps she realized that keeping you here was just charity, pity for an orphan who isn't really family." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Her small chest rose and fell rapidly as tears began to stream down her cheeks. "That's not true. Grandmama loved me. She said I was her sunshine, her precious gift." Margaret's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder. "Love doesn't pay bills, child. This house costs thousands to maintain every month. The staff, the utilities, the taxes, it's a burden that requires real family to bear." She gestured dismissively toward the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier, the oil paintings that had watched over generations of Whitmores. "All of this is mine now, and frankly, I have no intention of playing guardian to my sister's charity case." Sarah felt her knees buckle. She sank onto the bottom step, her small frame shaking with sobs. "Please, Aunt Margaret, I don't need much. I can sleep in the attic room. I'll be quiet, I promise. I'll help with chores. I just want to stay where Grandmama's memory is." Derek laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the grand foyer. "Listen to her, Mother. She thinks she can bargain like she has any power here." Margaret checked her expensive watch with theatrical impatience. "Enough of this drama. Derek, go upstairs and pack her things. 1 suitcase should be sufficient for whatever clothing she has. The toys and books stay. They came with the house." "No." Sarah scrambled to her feet, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please don't take my books. Grandmama read to me from them every night. They're all I have left of her." "They're expensive first editions," Margaret replied coldly. "Worth more than you'll see in a lifetime. They stay with their rightful owner." As Derek thundered up the stairs, Sarah fell to her knees on the cold marble, her small hands clasped together in desperate supplication. "Please, Aunt Margaret, I'll be good. I won't ask for anything. Just let me stay. This is my home. These are my memories. Margaret looked down at the sobbing child with something approaching disgust. You're home, child. You were never anything more than Eleanor's pet project, a stray she took in because she was lonely and sentimental in her old age. The cruelty in her words was deliberate, designed to break whatever spirit remained in the little girl. Margaret had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of watching Eleanor pour love and resources into a child who wasn't even blood family while treating her own sister like an afterthought. Derek returned with a battered suitcase, throwing it down next to Sarah with a careless thud. There, one pathetic little case for one pathetic little orphan. Sarah opened the suitcase with trembling hands. Inside were a few mismatched clothes, clearly the cheapest items from her wardrobe, and none of the treasures that made her feel connected to Eleanor. No photo albums, no jewelry that Eleanor had promised would be hers one day, no letters or keepsakes. Where will I go? Sarah whispered, her voice so small it barely carried in the vast space. Margaret shrugged as if the question bored her. There's a children's home across town. I'm sure they'll find space for one more charity case. But I'm only 8. I don't know how to get there. I don't know anyone there. You'll figure it out, Derek said with casual cruelty. It's a tough world, kid. Better learn that now. Margaret pulled out her phone and began scrolling through messages, already dismissing Sarah's presence. You have 10 minutes to get off my property. After that, I'm calling the police to remove a trespasser. Sarah stood on shaking legs, lifting the suitcase that felt impossibly heavy in her small hands. She took one last look around the foyer where Eleanor had taught her to waltz on Sunday afternoons, where Christmas mornings had been filled with laughter and torn wrapping paper, where bedtime stories had transported her to magical worlds where good always triumphed. Grandmama, she whispered to the empty air, I'm sorry I couldn't keep your house safe. Margaret's voice cut through her goodbye like a blade. Enough theatrics, out now. As Sarah walked toward the massive front door, her suitcase banging against her legs with each step, she didn't see Margaret's satisfied smile or Derek's triumphant fist pump. She didn't see them already making plans for selling off Eleanor's antiques and jewelry, or overhear their excited whispers about the Caribbean vacation they would take with the first installment from the trust fund. But someone else did see. Someone else had been watching. Across the street, behind the wheel of a black Mercedes sedan, Alexander Montgomery sat in stunned silence. The 62-year-old billionaire had built his fortune from nothing, starting as a paperboy and ending as the CEO of Montgomery Industries, one of the largest construction and real estate empires in the country.
More importantly, he had been Eleanor Whitmore's dearest friend for over 40 years. Alexander had come to pay his respects privately, knowing that large funerals overwhelmed him and preferring to honor Eleanor's memory in quiet solitude. He had planned to ring the bell, offer his condolences to Sarah, whom Eleanor had spoken of constantly with boundless love, and perhaps share a story or two about the woman who had been like a sister to him. Instead, he had arrived just in time to witness a scene that made his blood run cold. Through the tall windows of the mansion, he had seen everything. Margaret's cold dismissal, Derek's casual cruelty, and most heartbreakingly, Sarah's desperate pleas falling on ears made deaf by greed. He had watched the most vulnerable person in the room be stripped of not just her inheritance but her dignity, her security, and her sense of belonging to the only family she had ever known. Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Eleanor had spoken of Margaret's jealousy, of course, but she had always believed that blood was thicker than greed. She had trusted that Margaret, whatever her faults, would care for Sarah if the unthinkable happened. Eleanor had been wrong. As Sarah struggled with the heavy mansion door, her small frame silhouetted against the grand entrance like a bird being pushed from its nest, Alexander made a decision that would change 2 lives forever. He stepped out of the Mercedes. The October wind was sharp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter. Sarah had managed to drag her suitcase down the front steps and was standing on the circular driveway, looking lost and impossibly small against the backdrop of the estate she was being forced to leave. She heard footsteps on gravel and turned, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Through her tears, she saw a tall man in a charcoal gray suit walking toward her. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes were clearly expensive, and everything about him suggested wealth and power. But his eyes were kind. "Hello, little one," Alexander said gently, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent that spoke of old money and older values. "My name is Alexander Montgomery. I was a very dear friend of your grandmother's." Sarah looked up at him with the weariness of a child who had just learned that adults could not be trusted. "Did you come for the funeral? It was yesterday." "I know, sweetheart. I came to pay my respects to Eleanor, and to meet the little girl she loved more than life itself." Something in his tone made Sarah's guard drop slightly. "You knew my grandmama." Alexander crouched down to her level, his expensive suit forgotten as he balanced on the balls of his feet to meet her eyes. "I knew her for 40 years. She talked about you constantly, Sarah. Every time I saw her, it was Sarah learned to ride a bicycle, or Sarah lost her first tooth, or Sarah read me the most beautiful poem she wrote for school. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Sarah smiled. It was tiny and fragile, but it was real. She really talked about me, all the time. She was so proud of you. She said you were the smartest, kindest, bravest little girl in the world. Sarah's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. But Aunt Margaret says Grandmama didn't leave me anything. She says I was just charity. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. Sarah, do you remember your grandmother ever mentioning a blue envelope? Something she might have given you to keep safe? Sarah's eyes widened. Her free hand flew to her coat pocket, where she had kept Eleanor's last gift close to her heart since the day of the funeral. You mean this? She pulled out a crumpled blue envelope, sealed with wax and bearing Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. For my beloved Sarah, when the time comes to be brave. Alexander's heart nearly stopped. May I see that, sweetheart? With trembling fingers, Sarah broke the wax seal. Inside was a folded document, clearly legal in nature, and a letter in Eleanor's flowing script. Alexander read the letter first, his expression growing darker with each line. Sarah, he said quietly, do you know what this is? She shook her head, clutching her teddy bear tighter. This is your grandmother's real will, the one she had me witness and notarize just 2 months ago. Alexander's voice carried a steel edge now. According to this document, you inherit everything. The house, the trust fund, the investments, all of it. Every penny. Sarah's mouth fell open. But Aunt Margaret showed me papers. Fraudulent papers, Alexander said grimly. Your Aunt Margaret has committed a very serious crime, little one. But don't worry, we're going to fix this. Behind them, the mansion's front door slammed open. Margaret appeared on the threshold, her face twisted with rage. Get away from her. I told you to leave, you little parasite. Alexander rose to his full height, and suddenly the friendly grandfather figure was gone, replaced by a man who had not built a billion-dollar empire by being nice to people who hurt children. Mrs. Blackwood, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Alexander Montgomery. Perhaps you've heard of Montgomery Industries. Margaret's face went pale. Everyone in the city knew Montgomery Industries. Everyone knew Alexander Montgomery's reputation for crushing anyone who crossed him. What are you doing here? Alexander smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm here to collect Eleanor's granddaughter and to inform you that you are about to face federal charges for inheritance fraud, document forgery, and child abandonment. You can't prove anything, Derek snarled, appearing beside his mother. It's our word against a dead woman's. Alexander pulled out his phone and held it up. The screen showed a clear recording of everything that had happened in the foyer. Margaret's cruel words, Derek's laughter, Sarah's desperate pleas. Actually, it's your own words against you. I've been recording since the moment I arrived. His smile grew colder. Amazing what modern technology can capture through windows, isn't it? Margaret's face cycled through several shades of white and gray. That's illegal. You can't record private conversations. On a public street, observing events in a house with open curtains? Actually, I can, and I have. Alexander bent down and gently took Sarah's hand. Come along, sweetheart. Let's go home. Wait, Margaret shrieked, desperation creeping into her voice. You can't just take her. I'm her legal guardian now. Alexander paused and turned back, his expression glacial. According to whose authority? The forged will you fabricated, the one that contradicts the real document that was properly witnessed and notarized. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Detective Rodriguez, this is Alexander Montgomery. I need to report inheritance fraud and child endangerment at the Whitmore estate. Yes, I have evidence. Yes, I'll wait for your arrival. Margaret and Derek exchanged panicked glances. Derek grabbed his mother's arm. Mom, maybe we should what? Alexander interrupted. Run. I wouldn't recommend it. That tends to make prosecutors even less sympathetic. 20 minutes later, the Whitmore estate was swarming with police cars. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, examined the real will while her partner took statements from Alexander and Sarah. Margaret sat in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car, still insisting that Eleanor had promised her everything. Derek was in another car, already trying to negotiate a plea deal by throwing his mother under the bus. Mr. Montgomery, Detective Rodriguez approached with the documents in hand. Everything appears to be in order. The real will is clearly legitimate, and the forgery is, well, it's not even a good forgery. We'll need to do some paperwork, but legally, Sarah is the rightful heir to the entire estate. Alexander nodded, his arm protectively around Sarah's shoulders. The little girl had been quiet through most of the ordeal, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. What about custody? Alexander asked. The child needs immediate guardianship. while the legal proceedings worked themselves out. Are you volunteering, Mr. Montgomery? Alexander looked down at Sarah, remembering Eleanor's voice from their last conversation. Promise me, Alexander, if anything happens to me, you'll make sure Sarah is loved. She's had enough loss in her young life. Yes, he said firmly. Yes, I am. 1 month later, Sarah stood in the grand foyer of her grandmother's mansion. Her mansion now, but it felt completely different. The cold marble had been softened with colorful rugs. The formal portraits had been joined by pictures of Sarah and Eleanor together, laughing and hugging. Alexander had hired a wonderful housekeeper named Mrs. Chen, who made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world, and never minded when Sarah tracked mud through the kitchen. Alexander had kept his promise to Eleanor in every possible way. He had moved into the estate's guest wing temporarily, ensuring Sarah felt safe and loved while maintaining appropriate boundaries. He had enrolled her in an excellent private school where she was already making friends. Most importantly, he had sat with her every evening, listening as she shared memories of Eleanor and helping her process the grief that came in waves. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Margaret was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and forgery. Derek received 3 years for his role as accomplice. The real will was validated, confirming Sarah as the sole heir to Eleanor's substantial fortune. But perhaps more importantly, Alexander had petitioned the court for permanent guardianship, a request that Sarah had enthusiastically supported. "Uncle Alexander," Sarah called out as she ran down the grand staircase, her school backpack bouncing behind her. "Mrs. Chen says dinner is ready, and she made your favorite roast chicken." Alexander looked up from the legal documents he was reviewing, not for Sarah's inheritance, which was secure, but for the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Orphan Children that they were establishing together. "And did you finish your homework, little scholar?" Sarah grinned and pulled a math test from her backpack. Written across the top in red ink was a bright A+ with a smiley face. "Grandmama always said I was smart enough to do anything I wanted," Sarah said proudly. Now I know she was right. Alexander ruffled her golden hair, the same shade as Eleanor's had been in her youth. "She was right about many things, sweetheart. Most importantly, she was right that you deserve to be loved and protected." As they walked toward the dining room together, Sarah slipped her small hand into Alexander's larger one. "Uncle Alexander?" "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Grandmama knows that justice won? That the bad people got punished and I got to stay home?" Alexander paused in the doorway, looking up at Eleanor's portrait hanging in the dining room. In the painting, Eleanor was smiling her gentle, knowing smile, the one that had always suggested she knew secrets the rest of the world had yet to discover. "I think she knows, Sarah. I think she's been watching over you this whole time, making sure everything worked out exactly as it should." Sarah nodded seriously, then brightened as the smell of Mrs. Chen's cooking reached them. "Race you to the table, Uncle Alexander." As she ran ahead, laughing in the way only children can laugh when they feel truly safe, Alexander smiled. Eleanor had been right about so many things, but most of all, she had been right about this. Sometimes the most precious inheritance isn't money or property, it's the love that survives even death and finds a way to protect what matters most. Behind them, the mansion settled into its evening rhythms, filled once again with laughter, love, and the promise of many happy tomorrows. The story closes with the image of a house restored not just to its rightful owner, but to its rightful purpose, being a home where a child is cherished, protected, and given every opportunity to flourish. This is our reminder that justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. The wicked face consequences for their actions, and the innocent find protection in the most unexpected places. Sometimes a guardian angel comes in the form of a stranger with a kind heart and the power to make things right. What touched your heart most in this story? Was it Sarah's courage in keeping Eleanor's letter safe, or Alexander's unwavering commitment to protecting a child he barely knew? Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for the vulnerable, or perhaps been that guardian angel yourself? I want to ask you, how are you doing today? Are you carrying any burdens that feel too heavy? Remember that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and kindness has a way of multiplying when we need it most. If this story moved you, please share it so others can be reminded that good still triumphs in this world. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of love, justice, and second chances. Thank you for listening with your whole heart. Until our next story, remember, you are never alone and your voice matters.